Salam, and welcome to the People of Palestine podcast. I'm your host, Saja. All right, welcome back to the People of Palestine podcast. Today, Clarissa Bitar is joining me to chat about their family story. So welcome to the podcast, Clarissa.
Thank you.
So can you tell me about where your family hails from in Palestine and about their journey into the diaspora?
Yeah, my mom's side of the family, they are from Ain Karim,
Okay.
which, if you know, is a kind of smaller village outside of Jerusalem, but now it's kind of technically considered part of Jerusalem. But they were expelled and made forced out actually during the Nakba in 1948, and they were refugees that fled to Iraq, to Baghdad. And they were there for a little while before they ended up in the States, kind of early on, actually, in the States, around like the 50s. My mother was actually even born in Texas.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Her family were, 48 refugees that came and that ended up here. Actually, they ended up in Houston because one of my uncles, one of my grandfather's brothers and my grandfather were apprentices for this American photography company. And basically, this company, Matson, was able to write a letter that might let my great uncle come to Houston and study at the University of Houston under some context of him as a photographer and been working for this American company and got sponsored, basically. And then he was able to bring the rest of my family over. So they kind of came early on my mom's side, and then on my dad's side, they left Palestine in 1967 after the Six-Day War, and then they ended up in Jordan, and then from Jordan they ended up in the States in the 80s, and so they're all now in California for the most part. So we've been there ever since, but yeah, both sides of my family are Palestinian, and they were expelled at different times.
Both very pivotal times in Palestinian history. Yeah. That's crazy. So does your family still kind of talk about what that experience was like for them? What do you have, like, stories that you can share from that time?
Yeah, I actually was, super interested in hearing about all these Nakba stories from my family. So I remember, because I had recording equipment, I would sit down with my grandparents and just have them talk about, what happened, tell me about the Nakba, tell me about the situation. So I have a lot of stories recorded from them. But, I remember hearing on my grandmother from my mom's side telling me stories of, like, in 48, them not knowing what was happening. Like the Deir Yassin massacre had just happened, and they just got word of, like, people being massacred and killed. And so everybody was kind of frantic, and they didn't know what to do. So they all just started picking up and fleeing, thinking that they were back, to their home. So they, like, grabbed what they could. My grandma said that, my great grandma had, like, a purse that she knitted herself. It was like a, Tatriz purse. Up to whatever she could in that purse. And that was, like, all they were able to carry with them. And they just left by foot. And then, like, on the journey, my grandma, she stepped on a piece of a wire that had been sticking out, and it went into her foot, and it was, like, rusty. And so they like had no medical attention. They're walking this whole journey. And so, like, they had to, like, cauterize her foot with, like, a light, and lighting a piece of paper, and, like, burning her foot. And, like, these, like, traumatic stories that she would tell me, and, like, during the journey. And they still, at that time, she was 8 years old, what was happening. And their house was bombed in Ain Karim that my great grandfather had just finished building. And that house was bombed, and that's, why they had nothing left. So they picked up and just went to Baghdad, because my great grandfather's brother was working in Baghdad at the time, and he was able to help them come to Baghdad as refugees. So, yeah, and then on my dad's side, also hearing stories of the 6 Day War, and even before, my grandmother is from Bethlehem on my dad's mother, and she has distinct stories of remembering during 48 when like all the refugees started like pouring into the West Bank, into Bethlehem, and like how her father like was opening up the doors to their house and just letting in like so many people to take care and feed them, and because people were just like didn't know what to do, and they were just in a state of like um despair and like bewilderment and all this. So it's like it has like very they have a very interesting like different experience, because one was in Bethlehem at that time and one was in West Jerusalem, which was taken over. So it's like two different experiences. But then again, in like the 67 war, they were living in Jerusalem at the time, because my dad's father's from Jerusalem. And so they're all living in Jerusalem. And when the war happened, a bomb had fallen in their apartment complex and did not explode. Like if it would have exploded, it would have killed all of them. And like it did not explode, but thankfully, but that was enough for my grandfather. He was like, we're going to Jordan. That's it. I'm done.
Yeah, they got lucky.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy because my family on my mom's side is actually from Deir Yassin. And when the massacre in Deir Yassin happened, we lost 47 members of our family on the first day. And at the time, my grandmother was 6 years old, and she witnessed her grandmother getting killed. And in turn, because her grandmother was carrying her little brother, and he died from impact, basically. And so when I hear stories like this, it's unfortunate how common it is. And then, so that was in 1948, obviously. And then in 1967, that's when my mom was born. And when my grandma went into labor, it was like in the middle of the night. And at the time they had a curfew, and my grandpa exited his house and was like, my wife is in labor. I need to take her to the hospital. And the soldiers were like, well, we have to investigate this situation. We have to like search her body to make sure she's actually pregnant. And so that was the only way that they'd allow them to go to the hospital in 67. So both of those, just like your family, both of those years impacted my family as well. And I think you're the first person on this podcast to have the same like dates as my family. So it's really unfortunate how common these stories are in our history. How was that journey for them outside of Palestine, like when they finally made it to the US? What were those early days like for them?
I think that on my mom's side of the family, they had a really like difficult time early on, because they came in the 50s, where people were like, they had no idea. There was no like, there wasn't a community super established, and there weren't like things like an Arab supermarket, grocery market. There weren't like community centers or like places for them to have their community really like gathering spaces. And there also like was zero, if what little understanding Americans have now about our heritage and our identity and us as Arabs and whatever, like there was even less back then, from what the stories I've heard, and like they were like, I think, isolated a lot of times, feeling like very isolated from the community. And luckily they did find like certain members of the community that were also in Southern California when they finally like established themselves. So that they did have a few of the families that were also there. But they did have a few of the families that were there. Like that from, like, for example, that came from Bethlehem or from Ain Karim, and that they had remembered. But really isolating, like from what I remember from hearing from them. And people would be like, oh, an Arab, so you're Saudi, and like have no other context of like where geographically where it is. And also like, that being laced with a lot of Zionist propaganda. around
Mm,
like, oh, oh, you're from Israel. And it's like, no, I'm not from Israel. So, a lot of that would be like really, really frustrating for them early on because it's like that discussion was super prevalent. And I think that they had a
mm,
lot of like, you know, they went through a lot in that regard. And I think they also didn't, they came as refugees and were like working in liquor stores and like trying to like, establish themselves. And it was a really it was a difficult transition, I think, both isolating wise, financially, and everything. And on my dad's side too, they came from Jordan and they, had a little bit easier time coming.
mm,
I would say they were a little more like financially established in Jordan when they were able to come over. And that being said, still, you know, my grandfather, Allah yarhamahu, would tell me like
Allah
my
yarham.
biggest regret is coming to this country. Yeah, and he would tell me that because of just how isolated I think he felt, and like
Yeah,
really truly like he would tell me like, maybe I should have not left Jordan, or maybe he had all these, questions in his mind. And I think that's just always going to be an eternal part of like diaspora things and like feeling, what ifs and like what was taken from you. And like, especially for somebody like him who really experienced the Nakba firsthand, experienced the theft and the loss and everything firsthand. I think that, and he never fully recovered from that. Like, and I think that, um, seeing a lot of people in my family and, age and past here in this country and seeing how, you know, isolated they are, not only from their culture, but just how much mental gymnastics you have to do to be, isolated and supporting so much of the financially this like the genocide, for example, or the occupation from a long-standing point, or like seeing American policy, or seeing like how people
mm,
talk about seeing how little people know, or when they want to talk to you, how immediately it pulls up a slew of political discussions they have no right to discuss about or no information about, but they seem that they need to discuss it with you, and it's like all
yeah.
that becomes really continually exhausting. I think weighs on you. I think it weighed on my grandpa a lot. He had a lot of like,
Mm,
yeah, I think, and that being said, it's not like we had too many options. Like at the time, like, they weren't like, I think that they would have loved to have stayed in Palestine, both of my family,
yeah, of course. Yeah,
Yeah. But that's what ended up happening. So yeah, I think
yeah.
that it's a part of I think, they're happy to not have bombs being dropped on their head, of course. And there's a huge privilege of being in a space that you are not being actively like genocided and murdered, or like under an checkpoints and occupation like that. I think there's a huge privilege there that we have to acknowledge, of course. And so there's like a safety factor that they were like happy to experience and to like finally get and attain that. And I think that the price of that is sometimes also an isolation and like a little bit
Hmm.
of being like distant, which yeah, is a
Yeah,
different type of, but
yeah,
not at all equating them. Just, it's seeing what that brings, the other side of that coin.
yeah, 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 for sure. Have you been able to visit Palestine at all?
Yeah, yeah. I haven't been since COVID.
Okay.
Um, last I was there was like right when COVID hit,
Mm-hmm.
which I need for a trip. It's been way too long. But yeah, I every time I go, I'm like, I just want to be back there. I just want to get a little piece of land that
Mm.
have my trees and my little farm and and bring my oud, and I'll be fine. Like you will not hear from me.
Yeah, yeah. Can you
But
describe what Palestine is like? Because I haven't been able to go there. And I tried to ask this question to my interviewees if they've been there. Can you describe it for me? Because I just want a little bit of a taste of what you experience.
you, have you hmm, have you ever been to Southern California?
No.
Okay. Well, there's something about it's funny because I grew up in Southern California. There's something
Mm,
that reminded me when I first went to Palestine. And I was like, okay, because imagine like, it's very, at least in the South where my family's from, right? If you go to the
mm,
North, that is much more like green, with lakes and like Tabaria and like rivers and like,
Mm.
um, much more lush.
Mm-hmm.
And in the south, where my family's from, it's much more like arid with like, brown hills, beautiful hills and like beautiful rocks formations, but with like littered with olive trees and like
Mm.
stone fruits and pomegranates and figs and like, every fruit tree, honestly, that what I love about California, every fruit tree that I would find growing in Southern California, I see why my family liked it because
Mm.
it all also grows in Palestine. It's
Yeah.
really similar climate. And like the town, it's funny, the town that we grew up in Glendora, which is
Mm-hmm.
in Southern California, is like really known for its citrus. And it's like it's
Okay.
funny because it's like and it's also, like yeah, if, no, it's known for its citrus. And so I
Mm.
think there was this like a parallel. My grandpa kind of felt that a little bit at home when he came to and saw the land and how it would reminded him of
Mm.
Palestine. So I think that it's like from a beauty perspective. I don't know if I'm being ethnocentric and biased here, but like you have a desert, you have oceans, you have the Mediterranean Sea, you've got hills, you've got rivers and your lakes, and like it's literally like anything you could have wanted. So it feels like, to me, it was like this perfect paradise of a
Mm.
place that it just felt like everything I'd want, you'd want to have, and some deep ancestral thing clicked, where I was like,
Yeah.
this is how we're supposed to be, like where we're supposed to be. And,
Mm.
um, yeah, every like the ultimate goal for me in my life, like what I would think an ultimate goal is to be able to go back to Palestine.
Yeah.
And that's um, what's always going to be like motivating a lot of like hopefully in the future that's a possibility where like right now I can't go back for more than 3 months or I don't know if now what the situation is of naturalizing getting a Palestinian Hawaii, but
Mm.
I don't know if that's still even a possibility for us. And because of, I have an American citizenship, so I can go and I can go into Jerusalem, for example,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
I have 3 months as a maximum visa before you have to like go in and out and do this whole, dance. So
Mm-mm.
I definitely want to be able to eventually like try to buy a piece of land and have like settle down, like, have a house there, something, an apartment, whatever I can. That's the goal. Um, but yeah, it's just like a beautiful place with beautiful people. And like even through all this pain and through all what you're seeing, like there's such a warmth when you're there. There's such a warmth about our people and like such a inspiring thing to see, like people fighting for their dignity through for everything, like for every disgusting thing that they're put under, for every condition, for how many years and like we've been subjected to such disgusting treatment, and still there's just this like joy and fight for life and dignity, and it's just like something so powerful to see, honestly, very inspiring. And like every time I come back, I come back to this place and I'm just like, this place is empty, this country. So it
Yeah.
just takes me a second of a readjustment for sure.
Yeah. 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 I read an article yesterday. I think it was comparing the genocide that happened in Bosnia, um, and the genocide that's happening now in Palestine. And I lived in Bosnia for 2 years,
Mm,
from 2007 to 2009. And you were talking about the warmth of the people in Palestine, and it's the same kind of warmth that I experienced in Bosnia. And it's two peoples who literally their lives were wrecked, but somehow they're able to, I don't want to say move on because there's always like a trauma, but they're able to muster up whatever kindness they still have left in them and this joy for life. And one of the things about the Bosnian people, when people ask me, I've lived in like 5, 6 different countries throughout my life, but when people ask me what's my favorite country that I've lived in, I always say Bosnia, and they're like, why? And I said, I always say it's because the people are so warm. and they'll like if you need help on the street or whatever, they're so willing to like give you the shirt off their backs. And I feel like that's the same for Palestinians. And I don't know if there is like a, I don't want to say that there would be like a correlation there, but in my experience, like Palestinians are also like this. No matter where you are in the world, they're super generous. They want to give you what they have. And it's just it's such a beautiful thing despite all of the atrocities that are happening to our people. So that's beautiful the way that you described it. And I actually wanted to ask if you have hope about, you know, going back to Palestine one day, but I guess you answered it with, you know, your goals for the future.
Yeah.
So what are some ways besides the stories that you heard from your grandparents about the Nakba and everything like that? What are some other ways that they kept Palestine alive for you, for your cousins, anybody else in your family?
First and foremost, I think that, well, two-pronged. I think it was through music and food.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I grew up with Teta next door,
Mm-hmm.
and she is an incredible chef. Like she's
Amazing.
actually like I'm to this day think she could get a Michelin star, honestly. I'm
Amazing.
like somebody going up against her mahshi right now. No, it's that good. But I like really learned like early on we were so appreciative of having like really these like gems of like getting these dishes and getting to sit and have these dishes with our grandma cooking them and like them tasting so good and having people come from like overseas and being like, wow, this tastes just, and I'm being like, wow, we get this, like we get this amazing food all the time from Teta, you know, and like that
Mm-hmm.
direct like connection to that food for us initially was like everything. I remember just being so proud that I got to eat all these
Mm-hmm.
amazing dishes, you know, like so lucky. How lucky am I that I get to have mahshi, and how lucky that I get leban immo, how lucky that I get mlokhiyeh. And they're like, I'll have like American friends come over and be like, what is that? And I'd be like, you don't know what that is? Like, as if listen, I know what mlokhiyeh is and they don't, you know. For me, it was always something that like I was really proud of and like
Mm-hmm.
loved, you know, and music also in that way. Like my family's very musical. A lot of people in my family who are very musical love to sing, love to, you know, they play different instruments, not on a professional level per se, but like very much as a way to sit and gather and have fun with each other and spend time with each other. And like you know, I would look up at like videos, old family videos, VHS stuff, and like see just like music in the background, dancing, good food being brought out, like always Arabic music. Like my grandpa would like put on thought up and be like, let me explain the lyrics to you. Let me teach you about these lyrics. My dad, like this is what he's saying. Let me explain the lyrics to you, you know, be some like deep fusha from like
Yeah.
Kulthum, you know. And I'd be like,
Yeah.
okay. So yeah, it's like all of that. I think they did such a good job. And because I was raised also around so many of my grandparents, like thank God that I had my tete and jiddo next door and also had cousins
Mm-hmm.
next door and also had my mom's parents like 20 minutes away as well. So
Mm-hmm.
like we, like deeply saturated in like a little community, even though it was in diaspora, you know, like we
Yeah.
definitely were little shidle. And that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
important. Like I feel like that gave us um it gave us like access to this little like bubble of a hub of culture and like connection and yeah, that I always was like super I valued, like, you know, having that. It was very an overseas situation to wake up in the morning and be like, where are you going, like running next door to go meet my cousins so that we could eat like bed at Teta's house and then like go play in the backyard all day. You know what I mean? Like it's very much that was our experience growing up as kids, and then like having always walking into Tata's house and smelling like onions and
Mm-hmm.
like grilled in the morning because she's preparing the dish that she's gonna be cooking for the whole day. And it's like that smell and having that connection and having, you know, this giant like larger family unit that we're all kind of living in a really close proximity with each other. Like that was very much like a beautiful thing that they did for us as children. children that created a really tight knit. A cousin that you just saw walked out, she's she also grew up right next door. So we're like, we're
Love
always, and now
that.
we reach childhood. She lives in the same apartment complex, like down this door, a couple doors down. I'm like, we were
Love
really
that.
like just recreating that. But that is just like something that I think I appreciate how my family has like been tight knit like in that way because it has
Mm,
provided us with community outside of this larger community.
yeah. And so you mentioned music. So for the listeners and viewers who don't know, Clarissa is a musician. So was this kind of your introduction to going into music as your career?
Yeah, I grew up as a guitar player, and so I was
Okay.
always playing, just taking lessons and playing guitar since I was like 10 years old. And my family was always like, music is nice. It's a hobby though. It's not like really what you're
Yeah.
gonna do. And
Typical.
yeah, like you're good at school, go become a doctor. So when I
Yeah.
studied, I did the whole I'm gonna go become a doctor, and then I went to
Mm,
college, studied biology, and then there's somebody that a professor there, an American guy, and he was like, I
mm.
teach you. Oh, I took a world, you know how you have to take electives? I
Yeah,
took an
yeah.
art. So I did a world music arts elective because it said study specific music of the Middle East and North India. And I was like, oh, that sounds
Mhm.
cool. So I took it. The guy brought an oud to class. He's like, you want to learn oud? Come to my office hours. I was like, sick, I'm gonna learn. I always knew that oud because like, I always knew what the instrument was and seen it
Yeah.
around. Because I was a guitar player, I never had access to learning it. And my dad had an oud when he was like, I was growing up, but he's let his cousin Sam borrow it one time and then like
Mm.
never saw it again.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, I would always be like, Baba, where's that road? He's like, it's different than guitar. Baba. I'm like, okay. So I like never really like would bother to like look back
Yeah.
until I started studying it in college. And
Hmm.
then that's when I had the formal opportunity to actually learn oud and the maqamat and all that type of stuff. And then eventually he got his oud back when I actually like proved to him that, oh, actually I'm serious about learning this. And then eventually I switched my major to music. They were like, what are you gonna do? I'm like, don't worry about it. We switched the major to
Don't worry
music.
about it.
And yeah, now this is where we're at. But now they're honestly super supportive. I actually like really recently released a song with my dad, which is so funny because he's now like,
Amazing.
yeah, he got actually a really good voice. But now they're very supportive and everyone's like super, um excited when I bring the oud over, when I'm having a new song for when I want to make music. So everybody is just like they definitely jumped on board, I would say. But of course, initially they had their reservations, and that's that's typical. But yeah, that's how I got into music, and now like also being appreciative of the fact that they kept me in such a deep, steeped musical environment. Like for example, I'd wake up in the morning when I was learning, I would go to my grandpa. It was like wake up at like 5 a.m. sometimes, and the only person that'd be up would be my jiddo, and they
Mm,
would have coffee with him and bring the oud. And when you have somebody to play for,
hmm.
have somebody to respond to your music, they're teaching you by responding. Like when you have somebody that's sitting there and you're playing at the asim and you see which moments he's saying Allah or like oh this and this and you're learning and responding, learning to read his responses, right? And then to
Yeah.
like say, oh, okay, this is what made him he really enjoyed. I'm gonna pocket that, or oh he this wasn't that, or he loved this transition or this build up or whatever. And like this is part of the educational process of like learning that seem learning what the phrases are like really resonating with people and all that. And so having that him as a instructor kind of without him knowing it, just have him as a listener and a steeped, enculturated listener of the tradition, I've thought of
Hmm.
that like really provided me so much um education to have like somebody to bounce these off ideas off of and learn from those responses. So like forever grateful for like that type of mentorship and connection that he provided me. Because really I
That's
think made a huge
amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. It's even for me, it's more amazing that you learned from an American guy playing oud. And so I wanted to tell you this because I was here like in bed scrolling on TikTok and I accidentally saw one of your lives and I was like, oh my gosh, they play amazingly. And so anytime that a notification came up that you had a live going, I always joined. And then there was one time that I had like missed it. You were logging off And I was like, wait, please, can you play When Adam Allah for me? Because that's like my grandpa used to sing that to us all the time, Allah yarhamu. And you were like, yeah, I'll do it. And you played it, and I was like, oh my God, this is like so beautiful. And your like version of it is amazing. And so I just, first of all, I want to thank you for that, because it's just the connection to music for me is just it's amazing. And so I love that, the fact that you took it upon yourself to learn. And yeah, so that's awesome. And you were recently in Cuba and you performed. So what was that experience like for you?
That was really one of the most special, performances I've actually had. I think I had a performance in Palestine that gave me a similar feeling of like being very proud to be there. But in this was also a similar feeling, and like the Cuban people were so warm and welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they I was invited by the Cuban government for a family law that was passed, that was a very progressive family law. Like the queer and trans community had worked really hard on
Mm-hmm.
passing, that like really expanded the definition of the family and like expanded rights for so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Really, truly like one of the most progressive laws of its kind, honestly, in terms of like queer rights. And they were celebrating by having their annual gala for like the like gender and sexual diversity branch of the government. And so this gala, they basically had, multi layers of performances, and they wanted to have a section of the performance dedicated to showing like solidarity with Palestine and what's
Amazing.
happening. Yeah, and they were looking and trying to see, they're in contact with the People's Forum of New York.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, they were like, the People's Forum was in contact with them looking for a queer Palestinian to not only like go and show support as kind of like a move of solidarity to come perform for their gala, and also because Cuba has been going so hard in support of Palestine on an international level to like
Mm-hmm.
that that let like connection between us. And so I went, and honestly, like what a special reception that was from the Cuban people. Like on every level, they were, even if they did not fully know the music a lot of times that I was playing, or like really have super steeped in the tradition, they were very curious and like interested in learning about the tradition. And also like we're so um you know had such a strong and deep political conviction to like a revolutionary struggle that was inspiring to see an island that has like fought off the United States and continued to fight off the United States, and even through their, U.S. imposed blockade and trying to economically, suffocate them and trying to isolate Cuba on every level, and like still the amount of like commitment and like dedication to their revolution and to their struggle was just like inspiring like to see. And on that's not just on it wasn't just the government, it was like average people coming up and being like, we are revolutionary people, and like we've got your back, and like whatever you need for your revolutionary struggle, we support you guys, and we got this. And like, that level of like connection was really beautiful to see, especially, in that time, and coming from the United States, where we had a young military man light himself on fire in front of the embassy, and
Yeah.
who was American, and still people are just like, oh well, that's war, and so there's such a level of desensitization here that's
Yeah.
so horrific, that feels so mentally debilitating at times. And so to go and be like in other parts of the world where you're like, actually no, like the world is clear for the most part actually on who is the um enemy here, and who is evil here, and like
Mm.
who is killing who. And like, so I just feel like that was very refreshing and beautiful to see, and like to get that such a warm reception from the Cuban people and from the government, from like, and to see such progressive like law on queerness, but also them to
Mm.
be, you know, um, to be so committed to like revolution on such an actual like concrete level, like on a real not just by words, but like, no, they go hard for it. And I think that's something that's so powerful, like was really inspiring to see. Like, honestly, I had nothing I could say, negatively about that experience, to be honest.
I'm so glad you had that experience too, especially because there's such a narrative in the West that like queer Palestinians are, harmed in Palestine and they're not accepted and stuff like that. And so I'm really happy that you had that experience and that you were able to see that there is solidarity outside of the United States in general. So that's amazing. Yeah, I guess like on that topic, I have been outside of the US for like a year now. And so what's your personal experience been like since October 7th? Has there been any like major like racism that you have experienced or your family has experienced since?
Um, yeah, there was an incident that happened actually that kind of had a little viral TikTok moment.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, which was these two like white techie looking finance bro guys and in the Marina district of San Francisco. And I was picking somebody up in my car and I was wearing a sweatshirt that said Free Palestine. And I rolled my window down because I thought that I was their Uber driver. And I was like, oh no, I'm picking somebody up. And like he sees my sweatshirt and like looks at me through the window and is like, oh, are you retarded? Which I'm like, even use the word retarded. Is just
Yeah,
like, are
that's
you
ridiculous.
it's yeah. So I was actually honestly shook at the moment that he was using that word. And I didn't even know how to respond. I was kind of like, is this actually happening? And so I just kind of like ignored him. And I think that they were a little bit drunk, but they continued to like egg each other on, kind of like a Beavis and Butthead situation. And they were like, yeah, 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 are you, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what's happening? So I pulled my car up and to try to like just get away from them.
Mhm.
I'm parked on like a street, so I'm waiting for somebody. So I pulled up, but I couldn't pull up any further because there was a dining situation where they do like the dining
Yeah,
on the street.
yeah.
So I'm like, I don't really want to go around and have to do this whole thing. So I'm just like, okay. And then these guys keep standing here. I'm just trying to ignore them. They keep calling me names and like making comments. And so at some point I pull out my phone. I'm like, oh, what's now you're gonna stop? Because I pulled out my phone, you know, because they got embarrassed for a second. And then because I said that, they kind of doubled down. And
Mm,
guys tried to like get in my car, basically. The guy reaches through my window and like tries to like open up the door of my car.
the
And
caucasian.
yeah, and I'm like, what the heck? So I start rolling up my window and he tries to break my window.
Oh my
And I'm like,
God.
dude. Then he starts like roundhouse kicking my car and telling me, oh, egging me on, come on, why don't you want to come fight us? You're such a, you know, trying to tell me I'm weak. I don't want to fight them, blah, 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 whatever. They're assuming like this whole time that, I'm some dude that just is like wants to stay in my car. I had my oat with me in the car too. So I'm like, I'm not gonna come like the delusions were next level with these two. I was
Mm,
just
mm,
yeah, I'm not even trying to engage with you guys, but I pulled my camera out almost like just to be like, all right, is this actually happening? Like, do you guys is because nobody would believe me, honestly, like this is actually happening. And and then later on, like I posted the video and it went viral and the guys ended up like, wiping their social medias and like people are trying to like look for them. And I'm like, dude, the the way that they acted was so entitled and disgusting. Like they started kicking my car, like trying to break into my window, like all because of why? Like you thought that I was stupid because I'm wearing a shirt that says Free Palestine. And like and I don't even know what their deal was, to be honest, to this day, but there's definitely been like that. We've seen that, right? This happened to me also like the day before or the day after the kid was shot with in Chicago and
mm,
killed.
mm,
And so we also and that being said, like we've just seen them be more and more aggressive, Zionists be more and more aggressive and like emboldened to be aggressive because you can see how many times in the videos in the student encampments where they're literally like beating up students and the police are standing there just watching them watch by and then like they'll come in full riot gear to come take down some tents. So the delusions are next level and they've the contrast has been so highlighted, and the difference in treatment has been so stark, and so now it's like almost like, you can't even hide it. But definitely there has been an heightened violence and like more like attacks against Palestinians. And that being said, like also still a complete simultaneously um like a general sense of just like apathy from the government, and not really them knowing, like we could have like thousands of rallies and we've had such a strong movement here where like
Mm-hmm.
the student movement has grown. I've seen huge growth in that. um I've seen like a much more like diverse coalition of students and people in general supporting this cause, supporting Palestine, that in general, where like in the past when we used to be in SJP when I was in college, it should be like a bunch of Arabs being like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's it's changed a lot. So I think that's a positive thing. I think like where there's a lot to look at, that's positive. But I think, yeah, on the flip side, there has been a lot of like emboldened, violent people who feel like that they have the right to do this because it's like we can preemptively be violent to you because you have been bred to like assume that we are just the violent ones, and like which is psychotic, right? It's like I'm gonna be violent to you because you would have been violent to me. Like it's the delusion is next level. But yeah.
That's awful. I can't believe that this is the world that we live in. I'm sorry you had to go through that. That's awful. And
It's all
it makes me so mad because it's like people forget that we're literally humans just like them. And it's just like, how much more do we need to like freaking prove to you that we also have lives and we also like contribute things to society? And it's just, it gets tiring at times. I don't know if you feel that way. Do you feel that way?
I mean, yeah, we deserve just as much like dignity in life as anybody else, and like
Yeah.
to have to constantly and to have to like make a case for your humanity feels absolutely, it feels like the epitome of insanity, like right now what we're experiencing in gaslighting, and like and having to consume so many graphic images of just disgusting like genocide, witnessing it actively televised, and then like hearing the audacity of like the government to want to manipulate the death toll and minimize the
Mhm.
death
Yeah.
toll. So things like this that we're using now, Palestinian as a slur word, right? Like it's like we are at such a scary intersection right now, and it's being done to Palestinians right now, but like what sets precedence for like people to do this to all types of indigenous communities and to like poor communities and to communities that they deem less worthy and to whatever they decide. So it's not, and I think people are starting to recognize that on a larger like internationalism like level and a level of solidarity that's been like cultivated. But that's definitely to weaken those powers from a government perspective, from an institutional perspective on those levels is much harder when they have a all of them have their hands in the cookie jar, right? They're all like
Yeah.
getting by. And so yeah, it's
Yeah.
really it's beyond frustrating.
Yeah. I get that. So one last question for you before we wrap up, but do you have any upcoming performances that people should check out soon?
I do. Well, I have one coming up this Friday, I believe.
Amazing.
Yeah, at the Mocha House, which is a Yemeni coffee shop in Oakland. And then there's going to be another performance coming up that we're actually working on a set of more electronic music with oud and other stuff. I'm working with a producer and a saxophone player and a singer as well. So we're trying to produce a little more dancey type stuff that we're trying
Nice.
to put on a show in September, hopefully in the Bay Area. So people should stay tuned for that. And also end of August, there is a show at the Independent that I will be joining my friend during her set for. So I don't remember the exact dates, but there are some stuff in the works. So basically, you got to follow me on social media or Instagram or TikTok, and then you can stay up to date with the performances. Because Yeah, I think that's the easiest way right now for where I post about my regular stuff.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining today. And it was a really insightful conversation. So I really appreciate you taking out the time.
It was a great conversation. Thank you for having me.
Of course. If you resonate with our stories and want to become friends with a Palestinian, I highly encourage you to visit our website, www.thepeopleofpalestine.com, and sign up for our Olive Branch program. Once you sign up, you'll be paired with a Palestinian pen pal. It's just our way of extending an olive branch to you and welcoming you into our community. Don't forget to follow us on social media at The People of Pali on Instagram and TikTok, and subscribe to our podcast. Until next time, salam.